copy. Need a copy? Raise your hand. I guess I want to start off and just kind of preface my comments by saying, you know, as Mike pointed out, we're not taking leases over here. We're not competing with oil and gas leases. Probably the obvious question would be, well, what are you doing over here then? Well, the answer to that question is, most of those that you see up here are heavily involved in the oil and gas industry in central West Virginia. And, you know, there's been a lot of information floating around that's just false. And out of a concern for our industry and making sure that proper information gets out, we're just over here volunteering to try to separate some of the crazy things that you may have heard with what's factual. We all have a lot of experience in oil and gas. We do this every day, and we're just volunteering our time to come over and try to set the record straight and give you the opportunity not only to hear our presentation, but to ask any questions that you like. So I probably have the longest presentation tonight because it's kind of the most detailed subject, but anytime you have a question about something I say, just raise your hand and I'll try to answer your questions the best I can, or afterwards we can answer questions too. I want to start out by saying, if you don't listen to anything else I say tonight, I want you to take two things home with you from this meeting if you don't get anything else. The first thing is that oil and gas leases are complex. You're going to see these terms when people show you an oil and gas lease, and notwithstanding and theretofore and all these things. Get some advice. If you're going to sign an oil and gas lease for a number of years and a lot of money's involved, spend a little money and hire yourself an oil and gas lawyer that can understand this and explain to you what is in here. Because they are complex. So try to get the best understanding you can as far as what this lease means that you're going to sign. Unfortunately, there's probably not a lot of oil and gas attorneys here. You may have to go to Clarksburg or Weston or Buchanan or someplace, but get an oil and gas attorney to explain it to you, and make sure, please, 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 before you sign something, understand what it is you're signing. Don't sign it just because it's a form that some slick-talking nice guy gave you. Make sure that you understand what the terms of this thing say, because you are going to live with them for an awful long time. The second thing I want to say to you is, some of you have beautiful farms over here, and some of you have reservations about leasing and damages. You don't have to sign a lease. If you see what's going on, you know, no one can force you to sign a lease. So if you don't like it and you think it's not a good deal, don't lease. No one can make you sign a lease. So with that preface, those two things, get advice and don't sign a lease if you don't want to. Let's go in and talk about an oil and gas lease. And I've tried to put this together so most of what I'm going to say tonight is in this paper that you can take home and keep, so that when you're looking at your oil and gas lease, when someone presents you with one, you can go back and refer to this. An oil and gas lease is very simply a contract between you, the owner of the minerals, and the company that hopefully is going to drill a well on your property. And it's going to dictate when the wells, you know, if a well is drilled and how it's drilled, and, you know, how much money you're going to be paid and when you're going to be paid, and those type of things. So it's important. There are going to be a lot of other terms in here that we're going to go through that you need to pay attention to. And I've defined the terms here for you because you may not know what some of these things mean. Commonly, the term lessor, that's the person who signs the lease. In this case, that's going to be you. You're the lessor. The lessee is the person that you grant the lease to, the person who, the company, basically. The next thing is a primary term. A lease will have two terms, a primary term and a secondary term, and the leasing term clause will read something like this. This lease shall remain in full force and effect for a period of blank years, 5 or 10 years. That first section is the primary term. That means that the company has that many months or years in order to go on your property and drill a well and establish production. That's the primary term. The secondary term is the next part of that sentence, which will read, and as long thereafter as oil and gas is produced, essentially. So that means if a company comes along and they lease your property for 5 years, and 3 years into that they drill a well, then you kick into the secondary term, and as long as that well is capable of producing gas, your lease is valid. Could be 10 years, could be 20 years. We can show you wells in Harrison and other counties in West Virginia that have been there for 100 years. So understand, this is a long-term agreement that you're signing. It doesn't end at that 5 years or 10 years. If they drill a well, It extends the term of that lease.
Excuse me.
Sure.
How do you define producing? Can it start producing and then store it there and then continue the lease for as long as they're storing the gas?
As long as it's capable of production and that they're making payments to you, and we'll get into that here in the next section, what they have to do to keep that lease valid. There are things called shut-in royalties where if they drill a well that's capable of production, but they don't have a pipeline or there's some reason they don't produce it, there's a payment they can make to extend the term of that lease. Just which would be the same as actually producing it.
Storage is another category.
Yeah, we'll talk about storage. That's one of the terms here. The next thing is delay rentals. Generally what happens is the company is going to take this lease for the primary term of, say, 5 years. During that time, they're going to pay you a rental, usually every year, for the privilege of extending it. So if they don't drill a well in the first year, they have to make a payment to you to get you to the second year. And the second year, they pay you for the third year. Those are called delay rentals. Sometimes, and it's becoming more prevalent, they will pay you what's called a bonus. That means when you sign the lease, they're going to write a check to you, and sometimes that bonus is either in place of or could be in addition to the first year delay rental. So sometimes they'll say, well, we're going to pay you $5 an acre a year, but for that first year, we'll give you $25 a year, an acre per year. So you have delay rentals and or bonuses that are payable. Now, what's becoming prevalent in Central West Virginia right now has been what's called a paid-up lease. And a paid-up lease means that they say, well, you know, instead of having to pay you so many dollars a year and, you know, you're worried that we're going to pay you, we'll calculate the whole thing and pay you up front. We're seeing numbers as high as $1,000, $1,500 in some counties up front. So if you've got a 100-acre lease, there may be someone come along and pay you $1,500 times 100. That's a lot of money, $150,000. And they then control the lease for whatever that term is, 5 years, 10 years, whatever is negotiated. So those are the type of payments that you get prior to them drilling a well and producing it. There's also a payment, to answer your question there, called a shut-in royalty. If they drill a well, and for whatever reason it's not producing, maybe they don't have a pipeline there yet, or maybe the market is bad and they don't want to sell the gas, they can make shut-in royalty payments to you to extend the term of the lease. Generally, they can be so many acres, so many dollars per acre per year. I've suggested in here that you try to make your shut-in royalties so many dollars per well per year. And I've listed that in here. So shut-in royalties can extend the term of the lease after a well is drilled if they're not producing it. During the time that they're producing it, you're going to get what's called a royalty. A royalty is generally a percentage of the revenue that they receive. Now here's a tricky thing that you need to pay attention to. Traditionally, oil and gas leases in Appalachia, and that's Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Kentucky, West Virginia, the prevailing traditional lease has always been a 1/8 lease. That's 12.5%, and you get that off the top before any expenses of any kind. Recently, there have been some people, because the market's been hot, that have been paying 15%. Well, 15% is more than 12.5%, so that's a good thing. But where you got to be careful, and this is where an oil and gas attorney will help you, is sometimes the 15% royalties that they're offering are not calculated on the gross. They're calculated on the net after they deduct some things like taxes and transportation. Now, you may not know it, but in the oil and gas business, we pay a severance tax of about 5% off the top. So if we get $100, the government gets 5. We also pay some rather healthy ad valorem taxes, property taxes to the counties, which we're going to talk about later. Don's going to talk about. So how many of you honestly believe that the government's never going to raise your taxes again? Not going to happen. So if you sign a lease like that that gives them the right to deduct taxes, sometime during the term of that lease, those taxes may be higher than what you anticipate right now. Also, some of these leases give them the right to deduct some of their gathering fees, the cost of getting the gas to market. I'm not here to tell you what to sign. You know, you're going to have to make those decisions yourself. I'm just telling you that be careful that when you read that royalty provision, if it says, you know, 15%, 15% of what? 15% of the gross or 15% of the net? If it's 15% of the gross, that's a no-brainer. It's more than 12 and a half, you should do it. And you may want to gamble and take 15% of the net if you think the expenses are going to be less. Just understand what you're saying, what you're signing, and understand that there's a difference between, there could be a difference between 1/8 of and 15%, and 1/8 could be greater depending on how it's calculated.
Excuse me, how do they determine, you say the gross, how do you determine what the gross is? I mean, what the gas company sells
Yes,
to whoever's buying it?
correct.
And this continually changes, right?
Well,
If you have it for 10 years or something like that.
well, over time it'll change. You know, generally speaking, gas is generally, this is a very general statement, we usually sign contracts for 1 year at a time. So I'll sign a contract with my gas broker and agree that for the next year, he's going to pay me the index price for everything I produce, published index. And when I get my check, I take 1/8 off the top of that and I mail it to you, off the top. So, I mean, if you ever get in a question whether you're getting paid properly, you can call the company and say, send me a copy of the statement where you got paid. I want to see how you calculated what I got paid.
Every farm's metered separately.
Yep.
Your
How
lease-
often is it? 30 days?
30 days.
Well, that's a good question. Your lease should say that they pay you every month. Now, some of these companies right now, I noticed specifically, Marathon Oil's got a lease that says, well, you know, if the well is very poor and it doesn't make $50 a month, we keep the money till it gets to $50 and we send you a check. I don't particularly care for that. Some companies will pay your royalties quarterly. Most of the leases that we have taken traditionally have been paid, we pay you every month. So that's a good
About the
question.
Initial payment, will be 2 months behind.
Well, yeah. We're getting a little bit far afield here, but let me explain something to you. If I'm selling gas today, I sell it for the whole month of September, I don't get a check for 2 months. It takes them, from the time they read the meter, pull the chart off the meter, it takes them a month to process that and calculate all the volumes, and then it's got to go to whoever's purchasing my gas, and they cut me a check. So when I send a royalty check out in September, it's for July's gas. September's gas is going to get paid for 2 months from now. I mean, we don't get paid until then. Some leases will stipulate that they'll pay you within so many days of their receipt of a check. But that's generally not a problem. Usually, once you get a check every single month, continually.